They called me crazy when I started sleeping in doorways with my easel and paints, but let me tell you something about crazy. Sometimes it's the only sane response to an insane world. My name is Elena, and 3 months ago I was living in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. Today I'm telling you this story from a shelter in Brooklyn, but don't you dare feel sorry for me. Because what happened next is going to make your jaw drop. And by the end of this, you'll understand why I'm actually grateful for every cold night I spent on those streets. The gallery owner who destroyed my life, he's about to learn that you don't throw away a person's dreams without consequences. And those consequences are more beautiful and devastating than anything he could have imagined. You see, when you strip everything away from an artist, their home, their reputation, their safety net, you don't kill their creativity. You just make it desperate. And desperate art? That's when the real magic happens. I should probably start at the beginning, back when I thought Nathaniel Blackwood was my salvation instead of my downfall. The Blackwood Gallery occupied 3 floors of a converted warehouse in Chelsea, all exposed brick and dramatic lighting, designed to make mediocre art look profound. I'd been trying to get my work shown there for 2 years, sending portfolios that came back with polite rejection letters signed by his assistant. But persistence pays off, right? That's what they tell you in art school before they mention that most artists die broke and unknown. When Nathaniel finally agreed to meet me, I thought I'd won the lottery. He was exactly what you'd expect from someone who inherited a gallery instead of earning it. Perfectly pressed suits, affected European accent despite being born in Ohio, and the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. Your work has potential, he said, walking around my paintings like he was inspecting livestock. But potential doesn't sell, does it? What sells is story, narrative, the kind of compelling biography that makes collectors feel like they're investing in more than just canvas and paint. That should have been my first red flag, but I was so desperate for recognition that I ignored the warning bells screaming in my head. I can work with story, I told him, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. What kind of story? His smile widened, and now I know what sharks must look like to fish. Leave that to me, darling. Just keep painting what you paint, and let me handle the marketing. The contract he offered seemed generous. A solo show, 60% of sales, promotional support. What I didn't realize was that I was signing away more than just commission percentages. I was handing him permission to rewrite my entire identity. The transformation started slowly. First, he changed my artist statement, replacing my words about urban isolation and human connection with flowery nonsense about feminine mystique and intuitive colorscapes. When I protested, he waved me off. Trust me, Elena. I've been doing this for 15 years. I know what resonates with buyers. Then came the biographical details. Suddenly, I wasn't Elena Rodriguez from Queens, daughter of a bus driver and a hospital cleaner who worked 3 jobs to pay for art school. No, I was Elena Rodriguez, the reclusive artist from an old Spanish family whose mysterious past informs her haunting canvases. They printed this fiction in the gallery catalog, on the website, in press releases. When I tried to correct it, Nathaniel just laughed. Biography is performance art, darling. We're not lying, we're curating reality. The opening night was everything I dreamed of, and nothing like I'd hoped. People stood in front of my paintings, holding wine glasses and nodding appreciatively while discussing my tortured artistic vision and European sensibilities. I stood in the corner wearing a black dress Nathaniel had insisted I buy, watching strangers invent interpretations of my work that had nothing to do with what I'd actually painted. The artist draws from deep wells of ancestral pain. I heard one collector tell another. You can see it in her brushstrokes. Generations of Spanish melancholy. I wanted to scream that the painting they were discussing was about my neighbor getting evicted, not some imaginary ancestral trauma. But Nathaniel appeared at my elbow every time I tried to engage with viewers, steering me away with practiced ease. Let the work speak for itself, he whispered. Your job tonight is to be mysterious and intriguing. Save the explanations for people who matter. By the end of the evening, we'd sold 6 pieces for a total of $80,000. My share should have been $48,000. enough to quit my day job at the coffee shop and focus on painting full time. But when I got the check 2 weeks later, it was for $18,000. Expenses? Nathaniel explained when I confronted him. Framing, installation, promotional materials, catalog printing, opening night catering. It adds up quickly. I stared at the itemized list he'd prepared. $500 for artistic consultation, $3,000 for biographical development, $1,500 for narrative architecture. What the hell is narrative architecture? I demanded. The story we built around your work, he said calmly. The mysterious background, the European connection, the tragic artist persona. That story is what sold those paintings, Elena. Without it, you'd still be hanging your work in coffee shops. The worst part? He was probably right. The collectors hadn't been buying my art. They'd been buying the fantasy he'd constructed around it. But that fantasy was about to become a nightmare, because Nathaniel had bigger plans than just skimming profits from my sales. 2 months after the opening, he called me into his office with news that made my blood freeze. "I've been thinking about your next show," he said, leaning back in his leather chair like a king on his throne. "The mysterious Spanish artist angle worked well, but we need to push it further, create more intrigue, more demand." I felt something cold creep up my spine. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Elena Rodriguez needs to disappear." He said it so casually, like he was discussing the weather. "Not permanently, of course, just professionally. We'll announce that you've returned to Spain to reconnect with your roots, that you're no longer taking commissions or showing new work. Scarcity drives value, darling. When people think they can't have something, they want it desperately." I stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. "You want me to stop painting?" "Oh no, you'll keep painting. But Elena Rodriguez, the public figure, needs to vanish, at least for a few years. Long enough for demand to build, for your existing pieces to appreciate in value. Think about it. Mysterious artist disappears, leaves behind limited body of work. Prices skyrocket. And what am I supposed to do while Elena Rodriguez is allegedly in Spain? Paint under a different name, of course. I'll create a new identity for you, maybe something more commercially viable. We could go Nordic this time, or perhaps Eastern European. There's something romantic about struggling artists from formerly communist countries." I felt like I was falling down a rabbit hole. "You want me to become a completely different person?" "I want you to become successful," he said, and his voice carried the patient tone adults use with particularly slow children. "This is how the art world works, Elena. Identity is just another medium to manipulate." Picasso understood this. He reinvented himself constantly. The only difference is, we're doing it more systematically. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with a gallery owner. I was dealing with someone who collected people the way other people collected paintings, and I was just his latest acquisition. "What if I say no?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would hurt. His smile never wavered, but his eyes went dead cold. "Then you'll find it very difficult to show anywhere else. The art world is smaller than you think, darling, and reputation travels fast. One word from me about your unreliable nature, your tendency toward dramatic outbursts, your unprofessional behavior." He shrugged elegantly. "Artists are temperamental by nature, but collectors prefer stability in their investments." The threat was clear. Play along with his identity games, or find myself blacklisted from every serious gallery in the city. I had 48 hours to decide, he told me. 2 days to choose between artistic integrity and artistic survival. I spent those 48 hours walking through the city, looking at my paintings in collectors' homes and galleries, watching people discuss Elena Rodriguez like she was a fascinating character in a novel, rather than a real person standing right in front of them. And that's when I realized something that changed everything. The art world hadn't just commodified my paintings, it had commodified me. I wasn't an artist anymore. I was a product, a brand, a story to be packaged and sold. Nathaniel wasn't offering me a career. He was offering me a prison with prettier bars. So I made a choice that surprised even me. I walked into his office on Thursday morning and looked him straight in the eye. "Elena Rodriguez accepts your terms," I said. His face lit up with triumph, but I wasn't finished. "She's going back to Spain, effective immediately." But she's not painting under any other name. Not for you or anyone else. His smile faltered. I don't understand. It means you can keep the rights to the Elena Rodriguez brand you created. Sell the story, market the mystery, drive up the prices of those 6 paintings. But the actual Elena Rodriguez? She's done with you. I set my keys to the studio space he'd rented for me on his desk and walked toward the door. You can't do this, he called after me. We have a contract. I turned back with a smile that was probably sharper than anything I'd ever painted. Read the fine print, Nathaniel. The contract was for Elena Rodriguez to provide paintings for future shows. Elena Rodriguez just retired from painting. Permanently. The legal loophole wasn't intentional. His lawyers had been so focused on protecting his interests that they'd forgotten to protect against the possibility that I might simply stop being the person they'd contracted with. Within a week, I'd given up my apartment, sold everything I owned except my art supplies, and effectively vanished from the life Nathaniel had tried to script for me. But here's what he didn't count on. You can't kill an artist's need to create. You can steal their platform, manipulate their identity, exploit their work, but you can't stop them from making art. All you can do is change where and how they make it. And sometimes that change creates something more powerful than anything they would have made in comfort and safety. The streets taught me things about art that no gallery ever could. When you're painting on cardboard because you can't afford canvas, every brushstroke has to matter. When your audience is passing pedestrians instead of wine-sipping collectors, your work has to speak immediately and honestly. When you're sleeping next to your paintings because you have nowhere else to store them, art stops being about career advancement and becomes about survival again. I set up my easel in Washington Square Park at first, then moved to different spots around the city as security guards and police officers moved me along. Bryant Park, the steps of the Met, subway stations, anywhere people gathered and might pause long enough to really look at something. I painted the city as I was experiencing it now, not from penthouse windows, but from street corners, not as a visitor, but as someone who belonged to the margins. The work was raw, immediate, angry, and more honest than anything I'd ever created. Street art has its own ecosystem, its own rules and respect systems. The other artists working the sidewalks and subway platforms took me in gradually, sharing tips about which spots were safe, which cops were sympathetic, how to weatherproof work meant for outdoor display. There was Diego, who made sculptures from discarded electronics. Fatima, whose portraits in charcoal could capture someone's entire life story in their eyes. Thomas, a veteran who painted landscapes of Afghanistan on pieces of scrap metal because, he said, beautiful places deserve to be remembered, even when they were destroyed. These artists didn't care about my gallery credentials or my former association with Nathaniel Blackwood. They cared about whether the work was honest, whether it said something true about the world we were all trying to survive in. For the first time since art school, I was part of a community again, instead of a commodity in a marketplace. 3 weeks into my new life, I was painting near the Flatiron Building when I saw him. Nathaniel, striding down the sidewalk in his perfectly pressed suit, talking animatedly on his phone about market positioning and collector psychology. He walked right past me without a glance, probably because the homeless woman with paint-stained clothes and wild hair bore no resemblance to the carefully curated Elena Rodriguez he'd known. I could hear fragments of his conversation as he passed. The mysterious disappearance has created exactly the buzz we wanted. Prices on her existing pieces have doubled. Collectors are calling daily. He'd turned my departure into another marketing campaign, another story to sell. Elena Rodriguez, the vanished artist, was worth more to him than Elena Rodriguez, the living person, had ever been. That night, sleeping in Penn Station with my latest painting propped against my backpack, I started formulating a plan that would give Nathaniel exactly what he'd asked for, and everything he deserved. You see, when you're invisible, when society has written you off as just another casualty of urban capitalism, you notice things that people in suits and penthouses miss. You see who really moves through the city, who makes it function, who gets ignored, despite being essential. And if you're an artist, you start documenting those observations in ways that can't be dismissed or commodified. I began a series 1 called The Invisible City, paintings that captured the people and moments that keep New York running but rarely get acknowledged. The subway worker who stays late to help a lost tourist. The security guard who shares his lunch with a hungry kid. The cleaning woman who waters the office plants because no one else remembers their living things. These weren't portraits of poverty or homelessness. They were portraits of dignity, resilience, community. The kind of human connections that happen when people see each other as people instead of obstacles or opportunities. The paintings were different from anything I'd done before, looser and more expressive because I was working fast, trying to capture moments before they disappeared. The colors were more vivid because I was mixing pigments with whatever I could find. Crushed brick for red earth tones, charcoal from construction sites for deep blacks, even coffee grounds for rich browns. Necessity was teaching me techniques no art school would ever think to include in their curriculum. After 2 months on the streets, I had nearly 30 pieces in the series. They were stored in various spots around the city, some with Diego in his squat, others with Fatima in the storage unit she rented with money from weekend portrait commissions, a few rolled up in waterproof tubes hidden in places only I knew about. It was a scattered archive of a city's hidden life, and it was about to become Nathaniel's worst nightmare. The plan required timing, preparation, and a level of strategic thinking that my former comfortable life had never demanded. First, I needed documentation. Photographs of the paintings, records of when and where they were created, testimonials from the people depicted and the community that had watched me work. Diego helped with this, using an old digital camera to create a comprehensive visual record while I wrote descriptions of each piece, the circumstances of its creation, the stories behind the faces and moments I'd captured. Next, I needed legitimacy. Not the fake kind Nathaniel manufactured, but the real kind that comes from artistic merit and community recognition. This meant getting the work seen by people who understood art beyond its market value. Thomas knew a professor at Parsons who still believed in art as social commentary. Fatima had connections with community organizations that supported working artists. Diego's girlfriend ran a blog about underground art movements. Slowly, carefully, we built a network of people who cared about the work itself rather than the story that might be attached to it. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. I was painting near the Brooklyn Museum on a Saturday afternoon when an elderly woman stopped to watch me work. She stood there for nearly an hour, occasionally asking questions about my technique or the scene I was capturing, a group of kids teaching each other skateboard tricks while their parents watched from a nearby bench. "You paint like someone who's actually looking," she said finally. "Most people paint what they think they're supposed to see. You paint what's actually there." Her name was Dorothy Chen, and she turned out to be a retired curator who'd spent 30 years building the contemporary collections at several major museums. She was also someone who'd grown disgusted with how commercial galleries manipulated both artists and audiences, turning art into luxury goods for people more interested in status than beauty or truth. "The work you're doing now," she said after I showed her photographs of the full series, "this is what galleries should be promoting. Instead, they're selling fantasies and calling it authenticity." Dorothy became my secret weapon, the insider who could navigate the institutional art world while maintaining her integrity. She started quietly showing the photographs to museum contacts, art critics, and collectors who were looking for something real in a market full of manufactured personas. But we weren't approaching galleries. Not yet. First, we were building an audience that would value the work on its own merits. 3 months into the project, we got our first major break. A critic from Art News saw Dorothy's informal exhibition of the photographs at her apartment and wrote a piece about the Invisible City series that positioned it as street art that transcends its medium to become essential urban documentation. The article didn't mention my name or my connection to Nathaniel's gallery, focusing instead on the anonymous artist creating profound work at the margins of society, literally painting the city from the streets up. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Gallery owners called Dorothy asking about the artist's availability. Collectors inquired about purchasing pieces. Art bloggers wrote follow-up articles speculating about the mysterious street artist's identity. And Nathaniel, according to Dorothy's sources, was frantically trying to figure out who this new competitor was and why their work was generating the kind of authentic buzz that his manufactured controversies could never achieve. But we weren't ready to reveal anything yet. The series needed to be complete first, and more importantly, I needed to be ready for what would happen when Nathaniel realized that his vanished cash cow had become his biggest threat. The final piece of The Invisible City was painted on a cold morning in November, 6 months after I'd walked out of Nathaniel's office. It showed the dawn shift change at a construction site, workers arriving as the night security guards headed home, a moment of quiet transition that happens thousands of times across the city every day, but rarely gets acknowledged. As I mixed the pale golds and grays of early morning light, I realized this painting was also about transition, from the artist I'd been to the artist I was becoming, from someone who'd let others define her work to someone who'd found her own voice in the most unlikely circumstances. When Dorothy saw the completed series, 32 paintings spanning 6 months of street-level observations, she was quiet for a long time before speaking. "This isn't just a series of paintings," she said finally. "It's a manifesto. A declaration that art doesn't have to be separated from life, that galleries don't own the right to determine what has value, that the most profound observations often come from the most unexpected perspectives." She was right, and we both knew it was time for the art world to see what happens when you try to erase an artist, but accidentally set them free instead. The gallery Dorothy chose for the exhibition was perfect, a converted warehouse in Long Island City that had been turned into an artist cooperative. No pretentious lighting or manufactured atmosphere, just clean white walls and natural light from tall windows. The space felt honest in a way that Blackwood Gallery never had, like it existed to serve art rather than to sell it. We planned the opening for a Thursday evening in early December, sending invitations to critics, collectors, museum professionals, and community members who'd been part of the work's creation. But we also sent one special invitation, hand-delivered to the Blackwood Gallery the morning of the show. "The Invisible City, Paintings from the Street," it read, with no artist name listed. Just a date, time, and address, and a small photograph of one of the paintings, the subway worker helping the lost tourist, a piece that exemplified the series' focus on unnoticed acts of humanity. I watched from across the street as Nathaniel's assistant brought him the invitation. Even from a distance, I could see his face change as he studied the photograph. He might not have recognized my hand in the brushwork immediately, but he was smart enough to sense a challenge when one landed on his desk. Dorothy had arranged for several art critics to preview the series before the opening, and their responses exceeded our wildest hopes. "Anonymous street artist redefines urban realism," read the headline in Art in America. "This is what happens when an artist strips away commercial considerations and focuses solely on truth," wrote the Village Voice critic. "The work vibrates with authenticity in a way that gallery art rarely achieves." By the time Thursday evening arrived, the anticipation was palpable. The cooperative gallery was packed with people who'd come to see what all the buzz was about. I stood in the corner wearing the same paint-stained clothes I'd been working in for months, invisible among the well-dressed crowd, just as I'd been invisible on the streets where the paintings were created. Diego, Fatima, and Thomas were there too, along with other artists from the street community who'd become part of my world over the past 6 months. They looked distinctly out of place among the gallery crowd, but they belonged here more than anyone. They were the people who'd watched this work come to life, who'd supported its creation, who understood its true context. And then Nathaniel arrived. He walked through the gallery entrance like he was entering his own kingdom, scanning the crowd and the walls with the predatory attention of someone looking for an opportunity to exploit. He'd brought 2 associates with him, probably trying to figure out whether this anonymous artist represented a threat or an opportunity. I watched him move through the exhibition, studying each painting with increasing intensity. His expression shifted from casual curiosity to focused attention to something approaching alarm, as he began to recognize elements that were familiar but not quite identifiable. Extraordinary work. I heard him tell Dorothy when she approached to gauge his reaction, "The technique is sophisticated, but there's something almost primitive about the emotional directness." "Who is this artist?" Someone who understands that art should document truth rather than manufacture it, Dorothy replied coolly. She'd met Nathaniel before, at various gallery openings and art fairs, and she'd never been impressed by his approach to promoting artists. Are they available for representation? I'd be very interested in discussing a possible relationship. This was the moment Dorothy and I had been planning for. She smiled in that polite way that people use when they're about to deliver bad news. Actually, I think you've already met the artist. You just didn't recognize her without the fictional biography you created. Nathaniel's face went through several interesting changes as understanding dawned. Confusion, recognition, anger, and something that might have been fear all flickered across his features before settling into a mask of professional composure. But his voice betrayed him when he spoke. Elena. It wasn't a question. Elena Rodriguez. Dorothy confirmed. The real one, not the character you tried to turn her into. It turns out that when you free an artist from commercial constraints and fake personas, they create their most powerful work. I stepped out of the corner where I'd been watching and walked over to join them. The look on Nathaniel's face when he saw me, paint-stained, street-worn, completely transformed from the carefully curated artist he'd tried to control, was worth every cold night I'd spent sleeping rough. Hello, Nathaniel, I said quietly. Enjoying the show? He stared at me like I was a ghost, which, in a way, I suppose I was. The Elena Rodriguez he'd known had died when she walked out of his office, and this new version was someone he had no power over, no way to control or manipulate. You can't do this, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. We have agreements, contracts. For Elena Rodriguez, the gallery artist, I reminded him. That person doesn't exist anymore, remember? You made sure of that when you decided she should disappear to drive up prices on her existing work. Dorothy stepped forward with a folder full of documents. Actually, we've researched the legal situation quite thoroughly. When you announced Elena's retirement and returned to Spain, you effectively voided any ongoing obligations she might have had. She's free to work with whoever she chooses, under whatever name she prefers. Besides, I added, you said it yourself. Identity is just another medium to manipulate. The Elena Rodriguez you created belongs to you. But this artist, the one who made these paintings, she never belonged to anyone but herself. Nathaniel looked around the crowded gallery, at the enthusiastic responses to work he'd had no hand in creating or promoting, at critics and collectors discussing an artist he'd tried to erase, and I could see him calculating the financial implications. The mysterious vanished artist he'd been marketing had suddenly reappeared with a powerful new body of work, but she was completely outside his control. We could work together again, he said, and I heard the desperation beneath his professional tone. This new direction you've taken, it's marketable. We could build a narrative around your time on the streets, the redemption story, the artist who found herself by losing everything. I looked at this man who'd tried to turn me into a product, who'd stolen my identity and sold it back to me as career advancement, who'd threatened to destroy my reputation when I refused to play along with his games. And I started laughing. Not bitter or angry laughter, but something approaching joy. Nathaniel, I said when I could speak again, you still don't understand. You're trying to buy something that isn't for sale anymore. Over the next 2 hours, I watched him work the room with increasing desperation, trying to find an angle that would give him some claim to my success. He approached Dorothy multiple times, suggesting partnerships and collaborative arrangements. He cornered critics, trying to plant seeds about my difficult personality and unprofessional behavior. He even attempted to recruit some of the collectors, suggesting they'd be better served working through established galleries rather than artist cooperatives. But the art world is smaller than people realize, and word travels fast when someone shows their true character so transparently. By the end of the evening, Nathaniel had managed to alienate most of the people he'd hoped to influence, and several collectors made a point of seeking me out to express their disgust with his behavior. Real art doesn't need that kind of manipulation, one elderly collector told me. Your work speaks for itself in a way that manufactured personas never could. The opening night sales exceeded anything I'd experienced at Blackwood Gallery. But more importantly, every piece sold to someone who understood what they were buying. Not a status symbol or investment opportunity, but a genuine expression of observed truth. The buyers included community members who'd watched me work, fellow artists who appreciated the technical and emotional honesty, and collectors who valued art that documented rather than decorated life. 3 of the paintings were purchased by the Brooklyn Museum for their permanent collection, with Dorothy facilitating the acquisition. These belong in an institution that will preserve them for future generations, she explained. Not in private collections where they might disappear again. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, I found myself standing alone with my work for the first time since the exhibition opened. The paintings looked different in this space than they had on the streets. More formal, perhaps, but not diminished. If anything, seeing them properly lit and professionally displayed made me realize how much I'd grown as an artist during those months of necessity and improvisation. "So what happens next?" Dorothy asked, joining me in front of the final painting in the series. "More exhibitions? Museum shows? You've got critics calling this the most important street art documentation in decades." I thought about her question while studying the construction workers changing shifts, their faces showing the quiet dignity of people who build cities that other people get to inhabit comfortably. What happens next? In the old world, Nathaniel's world, the answer would involve career strategy, market positioning, building a sustainable business around my artistic identity. But those considerations felt irrelevant now. "I keep painting what I see," I said finally. "Maybe not from the streets anymore, but from wherever life takes me." The work decides what comes next, not market demand or career planning. Dorothy smiled. "That's what I hoped you'd say. Real artists don't retire, and they don't let other people write their stories." As we prepared to close the exhibition for the night, I noticed Nathaniel lingering near the entrance, apparently hoping for one last chance to salvage something from the evening. I walked over to him, curious about what final gambit he might attempt. "Elena," he began, "I think there may have been some misunderstandings between us. Perhaps we could discuss." "There's nothing to discuss," I interrupted gently, "but I do want to thank you." His eyebrows rose in surprise. "Thank me? For showing me what I didn't want to become. For teaching me the difference between success and authenticity. For pushing me to find out who I really was as an artist when nobody was watching or buying or creating narratives around my work." I paused, looking around the gallery one more time at the paintings born from his attempt to erase me. "You tried to turn me into a product, Nathaniel. Instead, you turned me into an artist. So yes, I'm grateful." I left him standing there and walked out into the December night, breathing the cold air and feeling more free than I had since I'd first started painting as a child. Behind me, the gallery glowed with warm light, my work visible through the windows to anyone passing by on the street. Accessible, honest, unfiltered by commercial considerations or manufactured personas. The way art was supposed to be. 6 months later, I received an invitation to show The Invisible City at the Museum of the City of New York, part of a major exhibition about contemporary urban documentation. The invitation was addressed to Elena Rodriguez, street artist, with no mention of galleries or representatives. Dorothy had facilitated the connection, but the museum was dealing directly with me, artist to institution, no intermediaries required. I also heard, through Dorothy's network, that Nathaniel had been forced to close the Blackwood Gallery after a series of artists left him following news reports about his manipulative business practices. Apparently, my story had encouraged other artists to come forward with similar experiences, and the art world's tolerance for his particular brand of exploitation had finally reached its limits. But that's not why I'm telling you this story. I'm telling you because I want every artist listening to understand something crucial. Your work has value that exists completely independent of what other people are willing to pay for it or how they choose to market it. When someone tries to separate you from your authentic voice, when they want to turn your identity into a commodity they can manipulate for profit, when they suggest that commercial success requires sacrificing artistic integrity, that's when you need to walk away. Not because walking away is easy or comfortable or financially sensible, but because the art you'll make when you're truly free will be more powerful than anything you could create while wearing someone else's definition of who you should be. The streets taught me that the most profound art comes from the most authentic places, and authenticity can't be manufactured or marketed or sold. It can only be lived, observed, and honestly documented. That's what real artists do. We bear witness to the world as it actually exists, not as other people think it should be packaged and presented. So if you're an artist struggling with galleries that want to change your work, agents who want to reinvent your identity, or institutions that want to fit you into their idea of what sells, remember this: you have the power to walk away. You have the right to create work that matters to you, regardless of whether it matters to markets. And sometimes, just sometimes, when you choose authenticity over opportunity, the world notices in ways that no amount of manufactured buzz could ever achieve. My name is Elena Rodriguez. I'm a street artist, a gallery refugee, and someone who discovered that the best revenge against people who try to erase you is to become more yourself than they ever thought possible. The art world tried to turn me into a product. Instead, it turned me into exactly the artist I was meant to be. And that, I think, is a masterpiece worth more than any price tag Nathaniel Blackwood could ever imagine.